in the past, and what do you all think about that, and is there any importance to it?
Well, the second Sphinx to me is a significant discovery. If the data is accurate, I had a chance to interview Filippo Biondi just about maybe 3 weeks ago on my podcast. Great scientist, I love his work. I've studied his research. I've delved into it. Does it mean that we're 100% accurate on everything? Maybe not. But I'm pretty convinced that his work is pretty accurate. And some of the discoveries that he's found there at Giza and the surrounding areas, and also in reference to this potential location of a second Sphinx, to me is very intriguing. I looked at the data extensively, I researched it, and when you look into the past, you discover that there typically always was two Sphinxes. And so it wouldn't surprise me if there was a second Sphinx. And with the damage and the destruction that happened within that region, specifically there at Giza, and I think that whole destruction was due to the Younger Dryas, which Randall Carlson talks about all the time. I think that giant ice sheet above Syria just melted on that impact and just flooded that whole area. You can kind of see the erosion inside the Sphinx enclosure. And so that means that imagine water moving at, an incredible rate of speed and kind of just pummeling everything in its path. Maybe the second area was overrun by a lot of flowing water, mud, an extensive amount of erosion. So it's quite possible that that location is the second Sphinx. I would love to go back. I'll be there actually in about maybe 5 weeks or 6 weeks. I'll be back in Egypt again. And I'm going to go back to the exact location where we studied and did the research, and where Filippo Biondi and his team used the SAR scan technology, synthetic aperture radar, to potentially pick out the site. And I'll be there with Mohammed Ibrahim in person, kind of investigating and doing some field research. And I hope to bring something back by the time we meet again in Austin.
Sweet. Thanks, Billy.
I have not interviewed Filippo, but I've been following it closely, and I won't comment on whether I think we're at 105% or 60%, but I will say that I think we live in a really exciting time where technology is advancing very, very quickly, and I think that in our lifetimes, we're going to see a tremendous amount of discoveries like the one we're talking about right now, and they're always going to make us a little bit uncomfortable. Some of them we're probably not going to be able to prove, but especially with AI coming, I think maybe in the next 10 years, we'll see people deciphering Rongo script. We'll be seeing all sorts of stuff happening. So I think that's a good thing for this space, for the work that we're trying to do. I would much rather hear people debating on the internet on whether there's a second Sphinx, if that discovery was real, than talking about what kind of TV they want to buy next. So I think this is all good. I would like to see the people in this community encourage each other and be open to these ideas. And if they get proven out, that's amazing.
Looks like we're going down the line here. I got one word: dig. I think really that's the only way we can get the full answer right. But I'm one of these guys who I'm excited about the possibility of a second Sphinx. I mean, people have theorized about this for ages with the two Sphinxes on that dream stela, and it's fascinating to consider. The one thing that gives me, pause is these images floating around on X of the 1929 photo versus the 2021 photo, where the 2021 photo shows this supposed sand mound. And then the 1929 photo, it's almost the same aerial shot, probably taken by a blimp. There's no sand mound there. So you kind of go, wow, what happened to the mound, right? Was it because we know that there was so much archaeological excavations going on there in Egypt in that late 1800s, early 1900s time period? If you look at the old photos of the Sphinx, it's almost covered in sand, right? And around the Great Pyramids and all the tombs, so all that sand had to go somewhere. And so they were making these long piles you can see in photos. So did they just miss that there was something under this one sand spot? I guess that's a possibility too, but dig, baby.
Obviously, digging would be the easiest way to find out. I'm pretty skeptical of the complete accuracy of those scans because they are using AI. What they're doing with synthetic aperture radar, and this is important to note. You go back to the 70s, they would use those exact same radar scans, and they would have things were fuzzy and they couldn't make out any detail. And now, thanks to computers, they can get this down to like 2 centimeters from space. So using AI, it does make sense that they could, find out more. Also, AI gives us 5 thumbs on when it makes art and stuff like that. So, but myself, when I see the Dream Stallion and see the second Sphinx and study, Egyptian myths, I think the second Sphinx is in the sky. I think it's Leo. I think that it has been for a real long time, not just 10,500 BC, but even in dynastic Egyptian times, during the time when the Nile was flooding, the Sphinx would travel right across the sky at night. So it was something the Sphinx brought life. So I personally I wouldn't be surprised if there was all kinds of cool stuff where it's said to be, but I think that calling it the second Sphinx is a little premature. But I would definitely have to agree with Derek. It's not hard. In Egypt, it's impossible to do anything, it seems, yes.
I think we're micless. Here you go. Thank you.
You do like too, I'm sorry. Here.
Thank you. Well, I think what Filippo Biondi has opened is fantastic, the debating about the possibility of a second Sphinx. I agree with Dan. I think that it's either in the sky or perhaps, because you see it on the Dream Stella, if there is a second Sphinx, it should be astronomically aligned with the Great Sphinx. Because the Great Sphinx was a natural outcrop, so the second Sphinx, if there is, it has to also be a natural outcrop. The Great Sphinx was also astronomically aligned for the equinox and for the summer solstice sunset. So I think there should be relationships if there is a second Sphinx. So astronomers should look into this. And of course, digging would be the easiest way, but I think that's the second option for now.
Sorry, I was just making sure you got a mic. So, I think the likelihood is that if you look at the photos from the early 1900s, the fact that there's not a mound there, but there is a mound there today, it's basically an impossible obstacle to explain away. That said, I think that what those guys are doing is it's some of the earliest chapters of like independent people being able to scan archaeological sites. And I think that LiDAR, GPR, et cetera, all these other forms of technology that independent people are going to be able to use to study archaeological sites is the way forward. So I think I'm going to echo Ms. Copperfield and say that I think these conversations are much more constructive. I like to see people talking about this rather than like the secret lives of Mormon wives or something, So I think that there are other things on the Giza Plateau that are going to be discovered that haven't been discovered. And the Giza Plateau will bury things just like that. There are mastabas that in the southern fields, we have entire maps written out of the interior and the exterior of the layouts when they were excavated over 100 years ago. But, there's so many sites out there. They don't have people out there to keep the sand from burying it. So we have maps and diagrams of archaeological sites and monuments in those southern fields. And today we don't even know exactly where that monument is because it's been buried by the sands of time. That's just how quickly Giza and Egypt itself will bury things. Do I think that there's a second Sphinx? I mean, I don't know. You see it in the imagery. You see the two Sphinx looking at each other. If it's not the Sphinx looking at the lion in the sky, such as Leo, then I think that the other possibility is that there's a Sphinx in southern Egypt. Egypt is divided by two lands. Everything throughout the Egyptian monuments is cut directly in half. You can go through tombs in the Valley of Kings, and one side is made for the north and the other side's made for the south. You know, the pharaoh is the king of two lands. Everything in Egypt is the place of two lands. Before the unification of dynastic Egypt, they were two different civilizations. So if there's a literal second Sphinx, I think that maybe looking in southern Egypt somewhere, you may find something. But I actually want to echo you and say that I think it's probably important to look for astronomical alignments. You know, these monuments are encrypted, like the cosmos is built into these things, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's a possibility that maybe if there's a second Sphinx, it's meant to mirror the northern Sphinx, so maybe it isn't a natural formation that's like modified into a monument. They could have just made another Sphinx, and maybe it's somewhere there in southern Egypt. But yeah, so those are my thoughts.
Well, I haven't had a chance yet to really explore into the second Sphinx yet, but I have been reading the work of Alberto Danini, the Italian engineer who did the relative erosion method analysis of the Sokol, or base of the Great Pyramid. And when I was there, I did notice something, but didn't have any thoughts about it, because if you look at the casing stones, the limestone casing stones that come down and sit on the Sokol, you know, there was this earthquake 675 years ago, and it loosened some of the limestone casing stones that had been impenetrable since whenever the pyramid was constructed. At the same time, a lot of buildings, because of this earthquake, which was epicenter right up near Crete, collapsed a lot of buildings in Cairo. So there was a dire need for building stones, and suddenly the Great Pyramid is offering up these limestone blocks. Well, and I may show some of this tomorrow. I have some slides where if you removed the casing stones that are sitting on the Sokol, that means that limestone surface was subjected to weathering 675 years ago. But if you project beyond where the casing stones meet the Sokol, you've got a couple of feet there where it's been exposed to the weather since the pyramid was built. And so Danini saw this, noticed it, grasped the significance of it, so he did 11 points around the base of the pyramid, analyzing the difference between the pitting or erosion in the limestone base that had a known date of 675 years compared to the date of the exposed. And he came up with a wide range of dates, and he used a statistical method. He describes it in his paper, which actually may not have been published yet. Anyways, what he comes up with is a mean date of 25,000 years for the building of Khufu's pyramid. And which I thought, that's interesting, because that's within 1,000 years of being like one traditional great year ago, one full processional cycle. Now, he didn't mention anything about that, but I did notice that actually one of the dates, or maybe even a couple of dates, came up over 30,000. One of the dates was close to 40,000 years. But so he did this statistical analysis, which he describes in the paper, using this relative erosion method, or REM, and came up with a mean date of 25,000 years for the building of the pyramid. And having studied some of the specifics of the rates of limestone erosion, that makes perfect sense to me, because, and I'll show a slide tomorrow, you'll be able to see the very distinct difference side by side between the erosion that we know was 675 years old and the erosion that is obviously much older than that. So it's clearly there's, you know, new discoveries happening that are opening the whole discussion about our past. And I think we're kind of in I've been talking to several people here today, interestingly, about this idea that, in fact, I forget who it was, somebody showed me the slides that they had taken from Easter Island with the, if you're out there, raise your hand. Sorry, I don't remember who it was, because I've talked about 50 people here since I've been here. Anyways, the interlocking stonework, the megalithic stonework, is so similar to what you see at Sacsayhuaman and Cusco and stuff. And you go, okay, so it doesn't seem like it could be dismissed as coincidence. And when we're getting this, you know, getting data on all of these sites from all over the world, my own studies and research convinced me that over at least 4,000, 5,000 years, at least within the historical framework and around the geography of the entire planet, we had groups of these builders who were working from a common template that involved the linking of earth and sky, and that there is a very sophisticated advanced science involved in why they were doing this. And it probably was, the purpose was, it was a type of the technological support for an ancient civilization that probably went through several episodes of destruction. And when we see some of the structures from within the last, say, 4,000 or 5,000 years, I think we're seeing possibly an attempt to resurrect some aspects of what I sort of think of as an ancient machine in a way. And when we look at these monuments and we look at the specifics that link geology, mathematics, astronomy, all of that, and you put that together, it's too consistent around the world to be say, okay, this culture just came up with this independent. And then, of course, you tie that in with the legends and the myths, which all say the same thing. Whether you call it the gods or whether, you know, one of the places I used to hike in North Georgia is called Blood Mountain. And right at the trailhead, there's a sign. And the sign talked about the Nunahai, who were these godlike people to the ancient Cherokee that lived there. And the literal translation of the Nunahai was the people who could travel anywhere. And that's a very consistent theme that we find throughout. I think possibly one, and I'll quit rambling here, but I think possibly one explanation is that we know now, indisputably, there have been a series of great convulsions and catastrophes in the history of this planet, and that have gone very far towards erasing what was here 15, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 years ago or longer. And is it possible that there were groups that specifically planned to be able to survive catastrophes and preserve knowledge, preserve wisdom, preserve science, preserve art, all of the things? And I think that we're coming very close to having to say that's the only explanation for how this works. And these people preserved the knowledge of what has been lost to us, and we're now perhaps in a position where we're about to see a major revival of what has been lost for thousands of years and be able to put the pieces back together and see something that at this point we can barely even imagine, our own past.
Well, maybe we start back at that end and work back this way. That brings me up to a question. Yeah, Jason, do you want to jump in here real quick?
Sure. So based on the Sphinx question, the second Sphinx, I haven't dug too deep into the research on that, so I can't really speak intelligently on the second Sphinx. It wouldn't doubt me that we would discover such a thing in this time in the human history. It seems like we're going to be discovering a lot more evidence of our history like this in this time that we're in. I have actually spent some time looking into the Sphinx on Mars. Has anybody looked into that before? So there is a pyramid complex in Cydonia where there's a town, a city that they called Cydonia, which sounds an awful lot like Sedona. So on this complex, there's about 5 pyramids. And next to the pyramids is a Sphinx. Well, Dr. Hoagland puts a big presentation on this, and it appears to be a Sphinx, but not like the ones we see in Egypt where there's a half man with a half head, or a half lion with a half man, a man head, so it's a half lion, half man. But when you look at it on Mars, you're looking down, and from the satellite imagery, the Sphinx is split in half. So on this side of this face, it's a human, but on this side, it looks like a lion. So you got to flip the picture in half to really see it. So that's what comes to mind when I hear major discoveries happening around the world right now. You know, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be blowing our minds. So it's a very exciting time to be in right now. Thank you.
Very cool. Well, you know, when you brought up, Randall, about how there were builders possibly working from a similar template and traveling all over the world, it reminds me of John Michel's The Re-Enchantment of the Landscape, when the landscape is wiped out or is a wasteland. Could you talk about that a little bit, since we're on this topic of cataclysm? And
Sure. So what Robert was just talking about, I think, is most succinctly codified in the stories of the Grail. And I don't know how many of you ever immersed yourself into the Grail stories from the High Middle Ages, roughly from the late 1100s to the early 1200s. It was about a 50-year period where most of the Grail stories were set down. There was probably at least a good 25 or 30 of them, depending on which ones qualify. But essentially, it describes the quest for what, in context of the whole storyline, is the antidote to the wasteland. And the fundamental secret of the Grail being that the king and the land are one. And if the story, whether it's whether it's Arthur or Anfortas or the Fisher King or whoever the identity of the king is, the king has been wounded and is not healing. The king is ill and not recovering. And the land round about has been laid waste. And the quest for the Grail seems to provide the antidote not only for the ailing king, but for the ailing land as well. And I think that was an important insight into what I would think of as the sort of the technological nature of the ancient knowledge, is that it's a universal system of healing that can not only heal the human species, but heal the land as well, that has been desecrated by these cataclysmic events. And I think essentially that's the fundamental idea behind a lot of these stories, because the idea of ancient cataclysms, whether it's by flood or by fire, are universal. And you have to kind of sift through the whole spectrum of traditions and sort of begin to connect the dots, because there's no one source that tells the whole story. As you probably well know, Billy, in your research, you have to go to multiple sources, and because for thousands of years, a lot of this knowledge has been dispersed. And that's what makes our time so unique right now, because we're in a position where we can really start connecting things in a way that even just wasn't even possible a few generations ago. And it's revealing a whole deep, complex history of this planet and our presence on it. And but there's also the problem that we again find in a lot of the themes, is that there's a resistance to the revelation or the disclosure of this knowledge. And we find that there are factions within academia, within the establishment, that would just as soon see these kinds of discussions go away. Because, and if you remember I don't know how many of you read some of the criticisms that came out in the aftermath of Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse. I sifted through those very, very in detail. And what I came away with was none of them from the mainstream media had any basis. There was no actual refutation or rebuttal. It was all name calling. And it was, Graham Hancock is a conspiracy monger. And I even read things like, well, if you believe Graham Hancock's story of, of an ancient civilization, you might think that scientists are lying. In fact, you might even think that politicians would lie. I mean, that was literally in one of the, and I'm going to put together an essay on that very soon and probably do a podcast, because what it shows you, though, is the resistance to this kind of opening that's happening has no foundation. And they kind of know that. And I think their desperation is starting to show. And it cuts across the whole spectrum of ancient history of academia, what's going on in, politics and foreign policy. All of that is linked together, and it is a house of cards. And they're afraid that if we start asking questions about our own past and that maybe we've been fed a sanitized version of history, that the whole house of cards is going to collapse. And it will.
So along those lines, guys, maybe you could start off real quick, Jason. What I was looking for in that question with Randall is that he sees in the archaeology, in the architecture, in the astronomy, some binding connection throughout different people, and there has to be some really important pieces there. What important pieces have you guys found in your research? Jason?
Well, on the lines of connecting the dots with all the sacred sites and the temple places around the earth, there seems to be a consistent pattern with these sites where they place them, for one. The location is very important. They seem to be on ley lines, the magnetic lines that run on the major grid lines. So where these grid lines cross, you will find an amplified energy created here, a vortex, a scalar, longitudinal electromagnetic type energy. And when you place a temple on there, you're actually amplifying that energy as well. So there seems to be a consistency of how the temples are built, the materials in this structure, it's like a focusing geometry. They're piezoelectric materials. They're able to embed that Earth's electromagnetic field. So the consistency between the geometry, the materials, the locations, it seems that they were all working together at some point, or they had an agenda. And then there's correlations also in as above, so below. So you'll find correlations within the Giza Plateau with Orion, with the Bosnian pyramids, with the Pleiadian star systems. So we have connections. In theory, you can say we're connecting dots there with ancient civilizations on Earth, as above, so below, with ancient civilizations above as well. Does that make sense?
Nice. And Luke, in your research, what do you think some of the stuff that you think is the most important thing that you found and how it connects us all?
Well, I think that something huge that we're going to see in the future is independent, like forensic archaeology in a way. I can give a couple different examples. In the time that I've spent in studying the Americas are very underfunded, and there's so many different cultures that, say you go to Mexico, well, they're going to invest all their time reconstructing sites and building museums around the Maya, the Zapotecs, the Aztecs, and Teotihuacan, right? That's going to be their main focus. But you're missing so many other cultures in the midst of that, right? And so at these sites, they go and they'll excavate a site, they'll pull out a bunch of artifacts, they throw the artifacts in the museum, and you have a few scholars that spend their time studying these sites, but it's not that many. And there's so much room for, and that's just Mexico, not Central America, South America, and even North America. The mound builder world is so overlooked, and that is a consequence of colonialism. It's a consequence of the early colonists making the continent seem like it was this vast uninhabited land that could just be run over for manifest destiny. That's why that happened. But the consequence of that is still 200 years later, people don't even know anything about the Hopewell or the Adena or so many other ancient cultures of North America. So there are all these places for people who are interested in the ancient world, people maybe like me who have a degree in anthropology, but I never went to work for a university, where I can notice something, like a pattern between artifacts that are kept in these museums and historical record. And I don't have to ever go excavate a site. I don't have to get a grant, but I can connect these dots between different archaeological sites. One thing in particular, the thing that I did recently was I traced the historicity of the fact that there were jaguars here up in North America, and we know that they were here in Arizona, but all the way out where I live in North Carolina, from 1680 to 1709, they were documented by 2 different explorers out there. There's no paper that's put together on these worlds of the Americas right now. I know that's not archaeology; it's like paleontology or wildlife history or something like that. But I started diving into that, and I found 2 different artifacts from the Mississippian world that have spotted panthers on them or spotted mountain lions. They call them mountain lions, but they don't quite look like that. They look like they're a jaguar. So that's just one specific example of how an independent person can come in and make discoveries on their own in the archaeological world. The next thing is LiDAR technology is becoming rapidly more affordable. I'm not saying you can go buy a LiDAR drone for $2,500, but whereas one flight used to be $150,000, one drone now is like $60,000. So you can get the funding to actually get a drone and perform projects. And so it's been like 3 or 4 years now. I haven't officially announced this at all, but I'll leak it here. But this year, myself and a company I'm working with, we're launching a LiDAR initiative here in the U.S., but also in South America, and then we're going to be doing it in the Polynesian world. But it's going to be, within the next 5 years, it'll probably be the biggest independently funded LiDAR project for archaeological sites that's ever happened. And one thing we're trying to vie for right now is permission to be able to perform a scan in South America that will be the biggest Amazonian scan that's ever been done. And so I think that, the speed at which independent people can move, and if you do it well, you can just blaze trails into these completely uncharted frontiers in archaeology. And I think that people like us who are able to draw in funding from casting a wide net and having a large audience, you can pull in that funding and you can do whatever you want with it. I don't have to appeal to a university, or I don't have to get somebody's approval to be able to grant me a sliver of money to be able to go do something. I can pull all that in independently and then go do it and give all that data back to the local indigenous people, use some of the money to help them. And again, you're just blazing trails at light speed compared to these old monoliths. And somehow, one way or another, they're going to have to catch up. But anyways, so to answer your question, I think that those are the 2 most important frontiers of archaeology and studying the ancient world.
Cool. Very cool, man. Thank you. Oana, what important discoveries do you think you found that connects us all?
Well, I'm very lucky to be studying a site in the Transylvanian Alps in Eastern Europe called the Carpathian Sphinx. It's a site I know for most of my life. And we found recently, I founded a project called the Carpathian Sphinx Project to do geology on the Sphinx with rubber shock. We did this a while ago. And with an astronomer to study the alignments that are at the site. And what I will be talking tomorrow, and I think it's quite extraordinary, is that there are alignments that are extremely, extremely ancient. And they relate to early men, to Neanderthal men, and early Homo sapiens. So the implication is that early man has been observing and tracking the stars for tens of thousands of years. And we are just finding this now. And there's a lot of research that I will present tomorrow. And many archaeoastronomers today are writing about Neanderthal men and early Homo sapiens being sky watchers, which is very interesting.
Thank you. Same question for you, Dan.
Okay. Well, I'd say first of all, these things aren't my discoveries, so I don't want to be like laying my claim on these. But like, if you haven't seen the Master of Beasts imagery, where you've got usually it's a woman, but it's got a beast on either side and frequently flanked by being held. This is something you see on both sides of the pond. You see certain styles of the metal clamps that were used in stone megalithic structures to hold them together. You see certain styles of these clamps that are used that seem very much the same on both sides of the pond, especially when they're used. As a construction guy, I look at it, it just looks like you put a wire, you staple in a wire, you go every 4 feet. It's the same kind of thing. We put a clamp here, we put a clamp. It seems like it was standard operating procedure, not just done on a site-by-site basis. There's the naval holding statues that you see on, again, all across the ancient world. You can go to pretty much any island anywhere and you'll find that Easter Island kind of, Göbekli Tepe, kind of in Sardinia. Anywhere you go, you're gonna find this same kind of thing. There's a lot of little things like that that you see as above, so below. I mean, this is something that you see in South America and you see it in Egypt, the same mentality going into things. But I also want to say something really quickly to address a little bit of what Jason said and what Randall said. And, you know, you would normally say the resident skeptic here, but I think me and Luke could probably arm wrestle for that spot. But as you know, a lot of people will really just dismiss things like life on Mars or a civilization on Mars coming before us. And you know, if you really think about this stuff, it's absolutely absurd that if you believe that there's life out in the universe anywhere, if you believe that there's probably another civilization out there in the universe, the odds of it being in our solar system right across the street from the planet that has things that could potentially survive and be viable, an interstellar voyage like tardigrades, the odds statistically are much higher that it was on Mars than it is on any other given planet. And that's from a skeptic's perspective. And I would say the same thing when you start looking at ley lines and stuff too. You know, crystals are a thing that a lot of people really kick the tires on. Oh, it's just a bunch of woo. It's like, why do every single human culture gravitate towards crystals and metal? Why does that happen? It's any evolutionary scientist, if they were looking at another organism, would assume that there was an evolutionary reason behind that. So dismissing that stuff isn't skepticism in my mind, it's cynicism.
That was great.
Thank you.
Choked me up. I'm fighting a little congestion, I'm sorry. You know, one of the things I'm most excited about is really just this mass awakening that we're seeing of that a forbidden history exists. And, you know, I've been doing this a while now, you know, pre-COVID in 2020, but it was so fascinating to see in that time this great awakening that began to happen with everything that was happening in the world. People started to look at history and they started to question everything they were taught in history class. And to me, this has some of the biggest ramifications for who we are today and where we're going, is when we can look back and realize that, you know, you've heard it said, those who control the past control the future, right? And so we're seeing this unraveling of the mainstream history, a stranglehold on our past, right? And people are questioning the ancient history timelines. And we've got all these great speakers here like Randall, who has been, you know, blowing those dams wide open with his research. But I just get excited about seeing people wake up to the fact that there's more to history than we've been told, right? The mainstream narrative will tell us that You know, the further we look back into history, the more archaic the civilizations were, the more inferior their methods of construction. Yet all it takes is sometimes one image you see on Google or a YouTube video, right, that makes you think, wait a second, how would the Inca have precision crafted these granite mortarless blocks that rank a 7 on the Mohs scale of hardness when their tools were 3 and 4 on the Mohs scale and manual in nature, right? It doesn't equate. And so I remember the first time I went to the Aswan Quarry, and I saw what I believe is one of the smoking guns of lost ancient technology, and that is these unfinished obelisks. Most people have seen the giant 1,200-ton one, but there's also a baby one behind it. And when you walk alongside these, it's actually comical because the Ministry of Antiquities will let you pick up a dolerite pounding stone, which is about a similar strength as the rose granite that the obelisks are made of, but they'll tell you that they precision crafted these out by pounding them like this, right? And so I did it for 1 minute straight, as hard as I could, and I made a little scratch. And so you do something like that and you go, is this for real? Like, how dumb do you think I am? And then so when you get around those obelisks, you see 1 meter scoop marks that go all the way around from the top of the rose granite bedrock down underneath, and then it pulls out. It was the evidence of some kind of ancient device that they had that was literally scooping it out in 1 meter sections all the way around. And so you see that, and you try the dolerite method that they tell you they did, and you know there's more to history than we've been told. So I think that's, to me, one of the most exciting things that connects with what a lot of these speakers are saying of where we're going, is when we get critical mass on this, right, that when we start to look back at, wait, so if they did that with a lost technology, what was that technology? You know, because I think that's what they're really scared of, that we will try to harness that technology again, because that would put a lot of people out of business, you know, when you think of free energy and you think of this kind of stuff. So I can't wait to share with you what I've got tomorrow. I've got a huge slideshow, so don't miss it.
I just had a crazy pinch me moment because I was listening to one of the people that got me started in this whole thing, and I'm sitting right next to him on this stage, and Randall Carlson, I mean, I have looked up to you forever, and I'm just so excited to be up here with you. The thing I sort of focus on with my work are sites that nobody else is paying attention to. And I'm willing to go really, really far and dig really, really deep to investigate these sites. So just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Easter Island, and there's a 13-mile hike you can do up the northwest coast of the island. There's no roads, there's no trails, there's no guides, there's no fences, and you really just get to boots on the ground, explore this stuff. And there are rock walls, stone walls, precision megalithic walls on the northwest coast of Easter Island that look just like the famous one on the south side of the island that nobody talks about. You know, I just recently went to the middle of Thailand, and there's a pyramid there that was just unburied 20 years ago. So I go to those places and I uncover the story. I love going very, very deep into archaeological reports. If they're in another language, that's even better, because I feel like I'm just on this like crazy exploration mission. And my point is, I think if you have 10 sites around the world where things look the same, you see the same clamp marks or stone carvings or what looks like technology, that's interesting. If you see 100 of these sites, that's pretty compelling. But if you're able to put together a portfolio of 1,000 of these sites that look the same all over the world, in every country, or almost every country, it becomes inarguable. And I think it's one of the things that I love to do is go explore these things. I'm going to talk tomorrow about all of the things I've uncovered in Cambodia. Lots of LiDAR stuff, super, super interesting stuff going on there. So that's what I like to do is say, gosh, it looks a lot like Sacsayhuaman, but it's in a place that nobody talks about. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
First of all, Robert, you put together an incredible staff here, incredible team. Everyone here is really, really good, man. This is good. It's an honor. I'm serious. This is incredible. I mean, you know, this is a researcher's dream to be sitting on stage talking with people that we may not all have 100% the same, you know, idea or concept or perspective on everything, but that's impossible. But we all respect each other's work. I mean, I respect every single person on this stage to the nth degree. And you know, this is just incredible. So to talk about one of the things that I feel like one of my greatest aha moments for me was research that I started about now 13 years ago, which made it into my first book, which is 8 years old, Compendium of the Emerald Tablets. And so in studying the Great Pyramid and the Giza Plateau, I started doing a lot of mathematics based on the size of the stones, the size of the base, the height of the pyramid, the coffer, the grand gallery, the dimensions of the king's chamber, and I started coming up with a lot of incredible mathematical anomalies. And so one thing I found, by doing a lot of, I'm not going to bore you with boring mathematics now, you can read the book, but to give you some of the calculations or what the result of some of these calculations were, you can calculate the sidereal year by the mathematics encoded in the pyramid, the tropical year. You can also calculate the height of the average height of all the peaks on Earth. So if you took all the peaks on Earth and found the average, you can now find out why the pyramid is that tall. Now, to do this today, if somebody said, okay, Billy, we would like to hire your company to calculate the average height of the peaks on Earth, I would have to go and get a satellite. I would have to put it in a polar orbit, because as the Earth spins on its axis, I would need to scan the Earth and take swaths of data so I can get the topographical data, and I can then get all the peaks, and I can make the division, and I can say, okay, this is the average height. Build a pyramid to that height. The pyramid is also located at the center of land mass, not the center of the Earth, but the center of land mass on Earth, which is very interesting. So the equal amount of land to the right, same equal amount of land to the left. And then also, you can calculate the mean distance to the moon. That's the average distance to the moon. So as the moon and the Earth, you know, move around the sun, they're not exactly in the same position. It's a slight, very slight oval shape. And so you get this oval shape. So the distance between the perfect circle and the oval is the mean distance. You can also calculate the mean distance to the sun. Now, I don't know. People with chicken bones and copper chisels, supposedly, is what they had, looking up at the sun and somehow can calculate the mean distance to the sun from Earth. That's one astronomical unit. But also keep in mind the Earth is orbiting the sun in a very strange elliptical orbit as well. It's not a perfect circle. And so they were able to calculate the average in between. That's amazing. Also, with some very simple mathematics, you can calculate the speed of the Earth on its axis. You can calculate the speed of the Earth around the sun. You can calculate the speed of the sun around the galactic equator, and you can calculate the speed of the Milky Way galaxy around the local cluster of galaxies. I don't think people with copper chisels and chicken bones did that. I'm not sure who did it, but I can tell you what, whoever it was amazing. Part two, when you look from the sky down at Giza, and you look at the pyramids and the surrounding, now worn down temples and complex, and you make some simple connections with lines. I have a great, I'll do it this weekend, as a matter of fact. I'll do it on Sunday. When you connect the lines between these sites, you end up with this grid. When you take that grid and then draw concentric circles to connect them from the center all the way out, you end up having the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. You take the NASA interplanetary solar system imagery, they have a disk system as well, a circular system as well. You take that and download it from nasa.gov, and you scale it down, and you overlay it to the Giza, and it matches down to the astronomical unit. So they knew what the AU was, which is the distance from Earth to the Sun, but you can extrapolate that out as far as you want to go in space, because we don't want to measure in miles, in kilometers, when you're dealing with those kind of distances. And so we're talking about the Giza Plateau being an actual map of the inner planets of our solar system, and also a calendar of the year, and also letting us know the distance from the Earth to the Moon and the Sun. They were leaving behind a message. To do this, you would have to have all this data first. And to do this, to have this kind of data, in my opinion, you need to be a spacefaring race. You need to have some type of technology orbiting the planet. And then you take all that data and you incorporate it into whatever type of supercomputer or whatever they had to say, I want to encode this into the structure, I want to encode this into the plateau so that it can be a time capsule for the people in the future, like us, to finally realize the magnificence of the people that were here in the past, that our ancestors were incredible, and that it was made for a time and a place for a new people born under a new sun, and we're here right now to learn all this information so that we can then, like they said, learn the correct information about the past and pass that on to the future so that we can have a proper future, that we can possibly get back to a golden age, and maybe we can sustain it this time.
Thank you, Billy, and thank you all, because all of you and your hard work coming together here enlightens these little crevices and corners that, you know, is either hidden from us or kept from us or not taught to us from when we're young. So appreciate you all as well. I want to open up this time for anybody who would like to connect with some of the speakers and ask questions. We have a mic over here if you want to come up and line up. You have to come over to the mic, though. There's it's up on the balcony there. Right there. Up on the stage. She's going to cut right in front of all of them. Look at that. That was hot. Wow.
Is the mic
And that
on?
big guy, he was struggling. She beat him to it. Did you see that?
Test.
Okay, it's on. So this question is sort of on topic and a little off as well. Recently, there have been these spheres falling from the sky, some in South America, and they're called boogospheres. I don't know if any of you know anything about them. They're about this size, made out of metal. They have what looks like a circuitry on the top of them. Around the outside of this circuitry, coming down like maybe at 20 degrees, there's language, ancient script, and then there's really interesting geometries, sacred geometries etched and carved on them. I'm wondering if any of you have any thoughts on that.
Thank you. Well, I'll take it first, if anybody. I interviewed Dr. Stephen Greer several times on this. Is the only research that I've got into it. So Dr. Greer, if those of you who don't know, he's a researcher into ufology, and he's brought forth a lot of whistleblowers over the years, former military and military security and aerospace engineers and even nuclear scientists. And so he's been kind of at the forefront of a lot of this stuff. And he was invited to go down and take a look at the boogosphere in person. He had it, right there on the table where he could touch it. According to him, and the study that's been done, and according to what he said, I have never seen it, I've never touched it, but it is a real device. That the seams on this thing are so well connected that it's almost indistinguishable where the lines meet, and it's almost blurred. Like it's made in pieces, but you almost can't tell that it's made in pieces. Kind of like what's that that Egyptian There's an Egyptian mask of Tutankhamun. What is it called? It's so stitched together, so seamed together so well that they had to do a CRT scan to see where the seams were. I forget the exact one it's called, but it's in the Cairo Museum. But anyway, it's like that. It's so close that you can barely tell where the seams of this thing are. And according to him, there's some type of resin on the inside, and they're trying to research what this resin is. And that chip on top seems to be some type of technological piece, and the writing has not been deciphered yet. These things, well, that one particular, it was flying, and it got too close to some power lines, and they believe it had an overload in some way, and that's what brought it down to the ground. But there were 16 of these things, not just one. So there's multiples of them, and I asked him, I said, what do you hypothesize it might be? And he hypothesized that maybe it could be some remnant observation drone from a different time period, or maybe even from this current time period. By who? We don't know. Could it be Earth-based? Could it be another species trying to peek in and watch and see what we have going on? Could it have been some remnant ancient technology that has been reactivated in some kind of strange way? Nobody really seems to have any real answers. It's still being researched and investigated. It's in private hands right now, so it's not in any military hands. But the question mark is still out there. We don't really know. I don't think anybody really, truly understands exactly what it is yet. But I'm just hoping that we get some more insight, whether we know it's man-made or not man-made. I'm looking forward to more information on it.
It's gotten heavier, too.
Yes, I'm glad you brought it. It did get heavier. When they weighed it, when they first got it, they weighed it. And after some time, the weight increased. So the mass increased. Well, that would be evidence of the reduction of gravity, or the anti-gravity piece inside of it may be malfunctioning, because maybe it was, the hypothesis is maybe it was slightly lighter because anti-gravity was still operating in some way on the inside. So even though it wasn't floating and flying, it wasn't its true full ground weight. But then in some way, maybe the power source dissipated, or maybe the anti-gravity field dissipated, and then it came to its true weight. So it did gain weight over time.
Well, I will add one thing to that. I haven't studied into it a lot, other than I read one paper on it that was talking about, it was a series of 3 concentric spheres. And the ratio of the spheres in this one paper was 4 to 3 to 2. And I immediately recognized that because I've worked with the team that's experimenting with the thunderstorm generators in India right now. And they seem to be most effective when it's 3 spheres in the ratio of 4 to 3 to 2. And seems like one of the effects of when these things are active, there's no moving parts in them, so I don't know if I'd call them a machine, but it has to do strictly with the geometry. And it's a way of amplifying the effects of plasma energy. And one of the byproducts of this is that it seems that there are effects of direct energy to matter and matter to energy conversions taking place. So if you have energy to matter conversion, that could potentially explain why it seems to exhibit an increase in mass. But yeah, there's some really interesting technological stuff going on now, and that I think is going to shed light on how the fundamental workings of an ancient technology. And these things, I have no idea, like with Billy, I have no idea what they are, where they came from, what the story is behind them. But that was the one thing that I noticed that seemed to be significant. And 432 is one of the fundamental Vedic building block numbers of creation, right? And we find it in the pyramid. Billy, you might know, the pyramid is a very, very close scale model of the Northern Hemisphere on a scale of 43,200.
That's right.
I mean, literally almost within a few feet. Mm-hmm. And something else that as far as the thunderstorm generator, is that you've got spheres, almost like dumbbell looking, 2 spheres connected by cylinders. The cylinders are in that same ratio, and you have plasma moving. It's an energized argon gas that's moving through here, and it's creating these plasma structures. And it seems that plasma is affected by certain frequencies that induce a sort of spontaneous coherence into geometric forms. And I think that could possibly be where the direction we need to be looking, because, I mean, it's the number. When I first got aware of this, I was told by the inventor that, that he had seen a video that I had put out maybe 14, 15 years ago talking about sacred geometry, and he utilized those geometric relations and found that there were effects. And so if we're in, you know, looking at temple architecture or, you know, any of the geometry of these structures, because they all display very consistent geometry relationships, square root of 2, square root of 3, the golden section, you know, these cosmological numbers, 432, 792, 864, 217, over and over and over and over again. And we find them embedded in sacred writings, in the descriptions of the metaphorical temples, the holy city, etc. And so one of the things that really caught my attention was that when you introduce this argon gas into these spheres and it starts whirling at a credible rate of speed, and then it's passed into these cylinders, and it's way too complex to try to explain what's going on there. And there are those, you know, Bob Greenier's work really sheds light on that. But one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting was that if you imagine a sphere, and imagine you're intersecting a cylinder into a sphere. You have to cut a hole, right? Well, now what you have is a sharp edge that if you look right at the transition from cylinder to sphere, it's almost a right angle. Well, that introduces turbulence into this whirling plasma and prevents this vortex coherence from forming. So experimenting with transition angles between the spheres and the cylinders, the one that seemed to be the most efficacious was about 51.85 degrees. So take that for what you will. And does that tell us that somehow the pyramid was involved, at least Khufu's pyramid was somehow involved in some kind of a plasma technology? And I think the answer to that could be yes, because there's other evidence that suggests that moving water under pressure has plasma effects. And we know that all the sacred sites are connected with water, particularly subterranean water, oftentimes water moving through fault lines, opens up all kinds of interesting possibilities. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
And just
So
really,
look into the Vedic numbers, the cosmological, the Kali Yuga, 432,000 years, the Maha Yuga, 4,320,000 years, the reigns of the Sumerian kings, 432,000, over and over. It's the cycle per second frequency of the note A in the ancient Dorian system, 432, 864. So somewhere in that, and I haven't got those pieces put together yet, but somewhere I think that's the direction we should be looking at. Very quickly, I don't want to monopolize this, but I'm talking to Beckett and Trent. We've been having some very interesting conversations about the ancient mound structures in North America. And I got to say one thing about that. That's what, like Luke just said, it's one of the very overlooked systems of this ancient sacred architecture, and most people don't understand the incredible scale of the phenomena before, like Luke was saying, was been overwhelmed by colonialism, which meant agriculture, railroad building, road building, urbanization, all of that stuff, which has erased, what, 90%, you think? Something in that. But we have surveys, and over the last about 4 or 5 years, I've been collecting every single thing I could find, written surveys, most of it going back to pre-Civil War, the few decades after the Civil War, to put together as much information specifically as we have about the mound culture. And in my building work, I do 3D computer-aided design. So I've started doing 3D modeling of some of these mounds that are now completely non-existent. And I'm thinking all this time I'm doing this, I'm thinking, God, what we need now is some really detailed LiDAR surveys to recreate this incredible, monumental phenomena of the ancient mound structures that ranks right up there with anything else that any culture has done. I may talk about that tomorrow. I'm trying to figure out, I'm only got, how much time do we have tomorrow? But anyways, we're in discussion about that, about creating models to show people this is what used to be here.
If you're doing that, that's this LiDAR project, at least part of it is, and I am so sorry, we opened up Pandora's box on your question. I promise we will keep this concise for everybody.
Mouse.
Oh, there's a mouse?
Yeah. It's okay.
Wow.
Not an ordinary mouse.
So, but that is, we've just gone way out in left field, but that is something that we're working on is rebuilding models, and that would be something very interesting to give over these models to you, because you can have, this LiDAR that my team and I are going to be working with, it is precise down to the size of a golf ball. So you can, it's an incredible technology, and we scanned Moundville recently, actually. Yeah. We found an archaeological site south of it. I shared it with some of you guys. If any of you guys want to see this monument that we found south of Moundville, I'll show it to you. Anyways, get me off this mic.
I've got one thing to say really quick to any government agencies that might be watching. I do not believe in UFOs or anti-gravity technology. Thank you very much.
Can I go? Go ahead. Thank you. After the mouse, thank you. I wanted to ask this question to Lou and maybe to Randall. I was wondering, now that you're talking about the two Sphinx, if there's any connection, or might be any connection between the myth of Sekhmet and the cow Hathor, in ancient Egypt, that actually comes from the Eye of Ra, and there is this destruction force that, crushes into Egypt, which could be tied somehow to the myth of Phaeton, maybe? No?
Tied to what?
To the myth of Phaeton in Greece, no?
Oh, okay, myth of Titan.
Of Phaeton.
Oh, Phaeton.
Of Phaeton.
The
Phaeton,
chariot rider.
No? So you have this myth about the Eye of Ra and this lion
Absolutely.
called Sekhmet, which comes, into Egypt and basically destroys everything, and then it's calmed and it's transformed into a cow, no? And I believe that together with Phaeton, they both kind of represent this destruction and renewal cycle that we see in so many myths all over the world. Yeah. And I was wondering, if the Sphinx is an actual marker of the equinox, and we believe in this duality of Egypt and the ancient civilizations, maybe the other potential things could be a marker of the solstice. And if you have a marker of the equinox, and you have a marker of the solstice, and you have a frame of reference, you actually have a map with a date that you can use arcastronomy, and you can, deduct back. So I was thinking if maybe, Lou, if you think that there's a tie-in in any way between, because I think you're not an expert, you're probably, very knowledgeable in Egyptology and some Egypt history. So do you know of any, for example, that myth of Sekhmet? When is it from? Is it from
Hathor, the benign form, a dual goddess, Hathor to Sekhmet.
Yeah.
And on occasion, when apparently we humans misbehave, Hathor turns into Sekhmet and becomes the fierce lioness god that pretty much comes down and wipes everything out. And the connection with Phaeton, absolutely. Phaeton was the, ancient commentators like Origen and others specifically say Phaeton is probably a description of a comet. So this is, and Phaeton falls from the description of Phaeton. If you read, I would recommend reading Bullfinch's Mythology, a really good exposition of the Phaeton myth, describes, it leaves the abode of Helios, the sun god, starts transiting around the zodiacal wheel, but then the power of the steeds leads pulls the chariot out of the zodiacal belt, and it plunges towards the earth and sets the earth on fire. And we know now there are huge deposits of charcoal all over the world from the Younger Dryas event, and could be very much connected.
I've been following this kind of myth, through Aruna and Surya, for example, right, in the Rig Veda, and trying to kind of map the course of the comet or the cause of the cosmological event across the myths.
The most likely candidate for that comet would have been the predecessor or the progenitor of what is now
Yeah,
the Taurid
yeah,
system of
yeah.
meteors.
Yeah, all right. Okay, well, so thank you.
Sure.
So, in listening to your presentation, I'm struck by the quality of a new paradigm in anthropology. And it seems to me that we're at a point of time in world culture where a new paradigm in consciousness is coming into being. I'm a little surprised that none of you mentioned the work of Rupert Sheldrake and the notion of morphic resonance, which you pointed out that all around the world you're finding similar forms in widely dispersed cultures. And I think we don't just need a new paradigm in anthropology, we need a new paradigm of consciousness and a new paradigm of the relationship of consciousness to the physical world. And it seems to me that one of the values of what you're doing is recovering the wisdom that the ancients had. They understood that relationship better than we do. And I'm very excited to see you do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know that maybe you weren't asking for a response, but that's something that I very often point out in studying ancient people, I guess studying specifically the Americas, right? Because our modern Western way of thinking really comes down from the Greeks, which sort of get their way of thinking from the Egyptians as well. So you have this line of thought that comes from the old world over to the Western world. But in the Americas and even in the old world, you have cultures that the way that those people think about their natural world and the way that they interact with it and the way that they perceive the spirit realm is so much more profound than the way that we experience ours. I think that one of my most controversial opinions is when you're in Egypt and you're in the Temple of Luxor and you go back into that back atrium where they say, supposedly Amenhotep III, this was his place to be connected to his father Amun-Ra, which, the pharaoh is thought to be the physical embodiment of the high god of Egypt. And they say that this was his lone sanctuary to be alone with that god. When I'm standing there and I'm looking at the magnificence of this temple and I'm thinking, if that really is its purpose, or all these other ancient places around the world that were built for people to interact with beings that aren't at least here in the third dimension, right? They're accessing something else. I just don't look at all that and think that that is just completely woo-woo made up. I think it's probably far more likely that something was actually happening in those chambers, that those people really, really were experiencing something, and it changed their perception of reality and the way that they interact with the reality. You look at ancient cultures all over the planet, these amazing structures that they built in the name of their religion and their beliefs in the spiritual realm, whatever you may have. I just think that the way that ancient people lived is so intrinsically different than us. And I agree with our guest who came up here that one of the great things about studying the ancient world and trying to pull that esoteric knowledge back to the modern realm is that it changes the way that we see our world, and it widens our perspective. And for me, it's been the healthiest thing I've ever done, from my perspective, my consciousness, and I think that everybody else here probably agrees with that. So, yeah, I know you weren't looking for a response, but...
Really quickly, if I could chime in, again, I'm pretty skeptical about things, and spirituality tends to be one of them. But I was having a conversation today with a man Robert introduced me to, a man named Kevin, and he, if you look at where we are right now, like we're on the cusp of being able to travel the stars, and at the same time, we have billionaires eating babies and all kinds of just really base, gross human problems, you know. It's, and every one of us has got to battle our own personal, you know, the kind of things Jesus talked about, right? And here we stand with like one foot into this beautiful golden future and the other foot mired into this monkey mentality. And if we don't find some form of enlightenment, whether it's spiritual, psychological, cultural, whatever the hell, if we don't figure something out, we ain't going to make it off this rock except for in little atoms. That's the way I see it anyway.
Well, hey, this is a quick one. I'd kind of like to poll the audience. Any bets on what kind of head we have on that second Sphinx? Is it a man? Is it a lion? Any guesses?
He's wanting to know what kind of head we have. If there is a second Sphinx, does it have the head of a lion or the head of a man? Or something else, right? We don't know. A ram, right? You know, just many different types of Sphinx heads. But that's a great question, actually.
Probably Zahi Hawass.
We can only, yeah. Zahi Hawass will discover it first. Always the first one to find out. It's in his next book, it's in his next documentary. But it's a great question. It's something to just hypothesize and think about. You know, unfortunately, it is just going to be a thought or a guess. You know, even the Sphinx itself, we can see that it definitely was recarved, but it could have been recarved from a previous person's face down to that smaller face, or it could have been a lion. So there's so many question marks. You know, what's the gentleman's name? I'm sorry, on the end here. Joseph. Jason, I'm sorry, Jason. Jason brought up something in the beginning in regards to Mars. And I've been a big, avid Mars researcher for quite some time. I founded the United Family of Anomaly Hunters. That was back about maybe now 16 years ago. And we've now accessed over 1,100,000 images from the space agencies and downloaded them. And we've processed all of them and come up with about 62,000 anomalies between 14 of our groups on social media. And we process them back and forth. We analyze them. We ask questions. We see which ones we believe are not anomalies or which ones are anomalies. And one of the greatest anomalies are not just one Sphinx or let me rephrase that, not just one rock that resembles a Sphinx on Mars, but two actually. And the second one that resembles a Sphinx on Mars, it doesn't have a lion's face. It actually has the face of an actual, what looks like, I can't say it's a face. Let me be very politically correct. The anomaly resembles what we would consider to be a face of a man. And that one made its rounds. It made it to CNN, NBC, Huffington Post, Fox. Many news outlets picked that one up. We've been on so many different mainstream outlets with them asking questions and not getting any answers, even from NASA. We've even had some of our work show up on ancient aliens. So it's not like I'm just talking about bullcrap work. Like we've done real good work and found real anomalies that have made it to mainstream, and even they are asking questions. NASA, when I wrote a letter to them about this place called the Presidential Panorama, this is where that Sphinx or that Sphinx-type anomaly is located that I cataloged and put up on social media back in 2014. They told me that we believe you might have pareidolia, but if you believe that it's something like a real anomaly, you're more than welcome to publish it. So I took it as my green light, and then when I published it, one of the NASA researchers clicked the like button on it. So I don't know. Presidential Panorama, check it out. It's an amazing image. Washington.edu hosts that image, and it's an anomaly like no other. It could be the second Sphinx.
Were you going to say something, Jason?
No, that was great. Thank you, Billy.
Hi, y'all. So the question is for Randall and Billy specifically, but if anybody else has any sort of thoughts on this subject, definitely like to hear what you have to say. So Randall, I was able to catch what you had to say about the Grail, and I saw your video on the Cosmic Grail as well. And I was wondering if you think the Grail is strictly a spiritual or philosophical idea, or you think it may also actually be an artifact. And Billy, do you think that that artifact could actually be the Book of Thoth?
You want to go first, Randall?
I don't think the Grail, absolutely spiritual, but we need to define what we mean by spiritual, because I think we're entering into realms where the difference between the physical and the spiritual are sort of dissolving in a way. But I think that the Grail, and you have to go into the literature, it takes so many varied forms that, of course, the most common, well-known one is the chalice. And it's got a very Christianized expression through the stories of the chalice, but it long precedes the Christianization of the tale. And I think what we're actually looking at there is it's a way of codifying the lost technology. I tried to kind of make that comparison earlier in my comments about it, that it isn't just one thing. Sort of a metaphor that I sometimes use is an automobile, and there's many components to an automobile. And you can look at, the carburation system, the ignition system, you can look at the physical components. It all has to be put together in a certain way, or it's just a lump of material. If it's put together in a certain way and has the proper fuel, it can take you on a journey. But I look at sort of the Grail like that in a way is similar, because you've got many of these stories, and they all are describing and looking at the Grail from a different perspective. And sort of the metaphor, again, that I think applies, it was going back to a tradition in India where the 5 blind men, they had brought an elephant into the village, and the 5 blind men wanted to learn about this new beast that had come in. And, you've probably heard the tale. One of them is holding, feeling the ears. One of them is feeling the trunk. One of them is feeling the legs. One of them is feeling the tail. And so they each one have a different impression of what it is. Well, it's a pillar of some kind. Well, it's a big, it's a snake. They're holding the tail. It's a big, I don't remember all the specific correlations, but the idea was that then a man came along and explained to him that, no, it's all this one creature, and you're not looking at 5 different things. And I kind of use that as a metaphor for the Grail's literature, because you look at the different dimensions of it that are being described. Chrétien de Troyes describes it one way. Robert Deberon describes it another way. Wolfram von Eschenbach describes it another way. The anonymous author of Parlez-Vous describes it differently. And you're like, at the end of it, you're scratching your head, confusing, well, what the hell is it? Well, you have to put these pieces together, and I think when you put the pieces together, and in the context of the story, what is it? It's the finding of the Grail, the application of the Grail that restores the devastated landscape to health, as well as the king. The king is a stand-in for the human species. The king is always, in the ancient times, what differentiated the king from everyone else was the fact that it was the role of the king to act as the mediator between the gods and the mortals. But there was a certain capacity that had to be induced in any individual who was going to play that role, and it had to do with the sangreal, which translates in one translation as the royal blood. And I think that it involves a technology that was not only the potentization of the human blood, and then that was passed on, and then in the Christian story of it, again, if you read that, so much of it has to do with the blood, the shedding of the blood, the symbolism of the blood, and that connection of it. So what I'm thinking there is that the Grail is actually a way of disseminating a diverse demonstration of different components of the lost technology. And so you can't just read one, you have to read a broad sample of them in order to get the fact that, yeah, we can actually integrate these different symbols that are presented as representing the Grail, and at the end of that, we have a coherent picture. And I think that coherent picture is of a lost technology. And there's a reason why all the Grail literature came out at exactly the time when the great high Gothic cathedrals were built, which are demonstrations, embodiments of that technology, because they are spiritual instruments for the connecting of earthly energy with the heavenly energy. And that's how the Gothic ogival vault works. It's all under tension, unlike all of the architecture that preceded the building of the high Gothics. You have these vaults that are under tension, unlike the rest with our purely compression. Well, any stringed instrument has to be tuned, and it cannot play music until it's under tension, right? And we find this reflected in the building of these Gothic cathedrals. We also find the rise of the Cathar movement. We find the troubadours, the Albigensians. We find the first schools of Kabbalah. The list goes on within this 50-year period, and this is when all of the Grail literature was released to the world. And you have to kind of realize that this was a time of extreme fertilization of this ancient knowledge that was presented at that time. And I think the Grail literature provides important keys to unlocking the inner meaning of all of these traditions. So I don't think it was any one thing. I think it was a series of things that are integrated, and at that point, then we have transmutation that takes place. And the alchemical knowledge and science of the Renaissance times and the scientific Enlightenment times actually, I think, was an outgrowth of the Grail. And when you read the Grail literature, you find the same thing. You find that whoever imbibes the Grail, is cured of all diseases and illnesses. The same thing you find with the discovery of the Philosopher's Stone in the alchemical traditions. I mean, I could go on, but I don't want to monopolize this, so I'm going to pass this microphone on, have a sip of water, and shut the hell up.
Now, Randall, give him a round of applause, please. Yeah. I really do believe that Randall's on to something incredible there, that he nailed it, because I have actually resonate with that information. And I'm not sure if it is directly connected to the Book of Thoth, like you asked, but I do believe that we're talking about a piece of, or multiple pieces of tech that have a function. If you begin to understand that all of these temples and all these ancient sites, well, at least most of them, I can't say all, most of them, they all have one base function, and that's wellness. Like a lot of people, when I take them on tour to these sites, the first thing they notice is that they feel better. We've seen people blood pressure come down. We've seen people with injuries be able to complete the tours and all these things, right? So, and in the ancient times, they all said that when they visited these sites, they had felt this energy, that they just palpable energy. They couldn't quite explain it. But then also, there's other levels to these sites as well. And I think the Grail could have to do with understanding a certain level of knowledge on how to access this spiritual technology, if you would. So, for example, if you have a laptop, right? Some people here only know how to check email and do one Google search, and that's their expertise, okay? But I could take that same laptop and I can give it to somebody else in here, and with that same laptop, somebody can come on there and run a computer-assisted design program, and they can actually design a skyscraper, they can design a city street grid, they can design, an aquifer, and I can then take that same laptop and give it to somebody else in here, and they can take it and they can actually design an intercontinental ballistic missile or a rocket ship that could take a man into space from the same laptop. So we're talking about understanding this thing in different levels of understanding. The base level is down here. By the time it got to the level of religion, it was probably the most basic bare bone understanding you can ever get. But the deeper you go back in antiquity, the more knowledge and wisdom you had on how to access this level of technology, how to actually make it function, most likely is how you were able to access the higher functions of some of these sites and some of these temples.
A common unifying theme with all these megaliths worldwide is that they supported life energy and agriculture. They have other functions, but there's one common function, and that's to support the well-being of the people who built them and where they lived and the environment in which they were built. And if you look at the Great Pyramid, from the perspective of Wilhelm Reich, who discovered orgone energy, that's an orgone energy accumulator, a life energy accumulator. And the principles of orgone energy are that it's contained and absorbed in organic matter and attracted to, then dispersed by inorganic matter. So the pyramid is mostly limestone, which is an organic rock from ancient marine life. And the king's chamber is solely igneous rock, granite rock. So energy is concentrated within the king's chamber. And rather than it being a place for the king to die, it's a good place for the king to recharge himself with that life energy. And because of the way the shafts are, the air shafts to the north and to the south, if you take the blocks out from the base of those shafts, you get energy streaming in from the cosmos into that center room, and you can create energetic spirals in the atmosphere. And the whole pyramid is an excellently designed cloud buster to create rain and create lightning. What do rain and lightning do? They create nitric oxides that turn into nitric acid mixed with water, and you have nitrates on the soil, and you have water on the soil. It's a great way to fertilize the whole region of the Middle East. And you can put just one copper pipe on one side of the pyramid, and that whole region will get rain. Or you go to another face and do the north side, or do the west side, or do the east side. So the pyramids and the whole ancient world was designed to help life energy thrive. And the ancient civilizations all understood life energy as the basis of health and well-being. That's why when you go to the sites, you feel better. That's why the medicines, like the Chinese had qi, the Japanese had ki, the Indians had prana, the American Indians had the Great Spirit. They were all common energies, and the person who most researched that in the 20th century was Wilhelm Reich. And he was put to death in 1957 in a federal prison, basically for saying that radioactive energy, radiation energy from nuclear materials, was unfriendly to human health. And for that, they burned all of his books. He's the only author in American history to have all his books burned except for 2 copies. One was in the Harvard Rare Book Library, and the other was in the Library of Congress, and very few people got to read them until recently. And the one person who did really plunge into them was Dr. James DeMayo, who died 2 years ago. And he replicated Reich's experiments and did rain cloud making throughout the Middle East, throughout Africa, and Georgia, and South Carolina, and Arizona. So the ancient technologies are here, the science is there, and the main question asked of any technology now is, does it support life or does it harm life? I had one person say to me, I don't believe any of this ancient civilization stuff, because if they really were an advanced civilization, they would have left behind plastics. It shows the level of consciousness. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Since we're in Arizona and we're talking about ancient civilizations, I was wondering if any of you guys, I watched a guy interview with Jerry Wills from Regina Meredith. They were talking about the Grand Canyon find. They, kind of got plundered by the Smithsonian, I guess. He said he found it by Quagget Falls in the Grand Canyon, very difficult to get to. Said it was at one time at lake level, but now turned into waterfalls, and it's up on a cliff and all this. I was wondering if you guys have ever heard any, things about that and can kind of, touch base on that.
Well, I was actually joking around today with a couple of people in the audience, I'm sure, that, the next time something crazy happens, like 9/11 or something, that I'm going to, when all the alphabet boys go to the East Coast, I'm going to roll the dice on running through the Grand Canyon real quick, because somebody's got to do it, right? And I could probably, kind of stumble around and act like I was on fentanyl if they really got on me. So I could sell it. Billy probably couldn't. I definitely could. So, but beyond that, man, I mean, this one, honestly, the Smithsonian, as a skeptical person, it's like at first I look into this stuff and it's like, the Smithsonian, everybody's, they hide giant bones, blah, blah, blah. It's like, if you know what the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, there is one institution in the United States that is immune to it, and it's fucking Smithsonian. So it's, the fact of the matter is, there is, if anybody has got some nefarious crap going on, I mean, that's all you got to say right there, right? It's like everybody else has to cough up all the Native American bones that they've got, except the biggest museum in the country that just happens to hide all the stuff. So, yeah, I think it's definitely worth investigating. But sadly, without boots on the ground, all we get are stories, right? So, can't even fly a drone there.
I'll just say one thing about Arizona. I think it's much more mysterious than a lot of people give it credit for. There's a lot of underground lava tubes and fissures all through the state. Lots and lots of myths and stories. There's one specific site called Casa Malpais down in Springerville, Arizona. I don't know if anybody's been there, but it actually hit the New York Times several years ago because somebody rappelled down into one of the fissures and they found a giant open cavern with what looked like mummies, burials inside this cavern. And I found that very interesting, so I went there. And I learned that you can't go there without a guide. And so the local museum sends you there with a guide. And if you ask about the fissure, he says it's not there. And he won't let you go up there and look. So I think there's deep, deep mysteries here in Arizona, across obviously the eastern United States with the mounds. So America's really, really overlooked. There's a lot of amazing mysteries here, and I think it's much older than people give it credit for.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely going to echo what she was saying about the Americas being incredibly mysterious. I could go on about this all day. Something that's interesting to touch on with the Grand Canyon. Anybody here ever seen? I think the Y-Files did a big episode on this. The supposed Egyptian artifacts being found in the Grand Canyon. Anybody ever looked into this? So one of the reasons that a lot of people look at the Grand Canyon or at the Southwest and thought that maybe the Egyptians were here was because they find mummies all over the place. And to this day, like, you really can't find that many photos, if any, of some of the mummies that have been found in the American Southwest because they are, they're looked at as spiritual or sacred artifacts that are kind of like immune to being categorized in the archaeological record. And I can understand Native people, even though, it's odd sometimes. Like, you can find a mummy that's 3,500 years old, but yet the modern people that are living there claim that as their ancestral heritage, which in some way I understand, but it's also like, no, this was actually a different culture of people that moved in, and the original culture that was here went out to the east, whatever. But, I wish that these things would at least be allowed to be digitally categorized, but that's a whole other, you know what I'm saying. So anyways, the American Southwest, very, very interesting. I guess the reason that the Egyptian idea doesn't stack up is because the Egyptians did not like the desert at all. They were not desert people. They lived right on the fertile oasis that was right on the river, only in the green part. They didn't go out into the desert. They thought the desert was for death, and there were marauders and raiders out there. So that's all very, very interesting. But yeah, I think that there's so much more that is, those first expeditions. One of these series that I do is the First Explorers, following people really in the Americas a lot, like coming through the Americas. And if there's a has anybody ever? I think it's a pretty famous classical book, but it's called what is it? The first, what is it? First expedition or the exploration of the Colorado River? Is that what it is? And it goes through part of it goes through like major areas of the Grand Canyon and the civilizations that they saw out there. So much of that just does not exist anymore. It disappeared through time. And so again, I'm a huge advocate of looking into the Americas. So. I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. Sometimes I go down a mental rabbit hole and I get lost. So the Smithsonian, they've done a lot of great work, and then amidst that great work, they do very strange things. So the discovery of the Olmecs is like, in collaboration with the Mexican government and Mexicans working on the project, but really led by Americans. The discovery of the Olmecs was made under the archaeologist Matthew Sterling. And that was done while he was working for the Smithsonian. Now, Matthew Sterling, pretty straight up guy,
very interested in ancient cultures of the Americas and in like Papua New Guinea and everything. And what's interesting is if you study his writings and his expeditions, you find, all these sites that he uncovered in the Olmec world, and I think he found like 15 of the 17 heads. But what's really interesting is when I was down at the site of San Lorenzo in Mexico, and I was talking to this old Mexican man that was there in the 1940s when they were doing some of the final initial excavations at San Lorenzo. He told me about how at this palace there were these men there that were over 6.5 feet tall, near 7 feet tall, 3 skeletons that they excavated. And the men that were there, they put the bones in these boxes and they put them on trucks and sent them back to Mexico City. Now keep in mind, this is the Smithsonian overseeing all of this. And those bones just completely disappeared. I mean, I'm an anthropologist that's spent so much time working in Mesoamerica and Mexico, and I mean, zero shot I would ever have any chance at being able to see those bones or even know where they went. They just, I mean, how many people in here have heard stories of them finding giant people and then they're gone, It's an odd thing, and sometimes I wonder if that's not, an early 1900s phenomena of like, you've got these pretty wealthy guys that are pretty powerful who are interested in giants. And so every time they hear a report of it, they have funded these expeditions to be able to excavate San Lorenzo. And their reward for that is, oh, you found some giants? All right. Well, you know what my payment for my investment in all of this is. And so that's what I suspect is going on, because you don't hear as much about people finding giants and them disappearing anymore. And so I think that was kind of an early 1900s phenomena, and it will be very interesting someday when some old rich guy dies and his son like releases to the world, hey, my grandfather had these giant bones in his basement somewhere, So,
Speaking of giants, has anyone heard of Lovelock Cave? Yes. I don't know a whole lot about Arizona, but neighboring state Nevada, real quick. This was one of the things that kind of took me down the rabbit trail of forbidden history. I was living in Sacramento years ago when I was starting to come into all this, and I stumbled upon the legend of Lovelock Cave out like 80 miles east of Reno. And so I drove out there. I convinced a buddy of mine. I said, hey, we got to go on a road trip. And let me preface that by saying this: the Paiutes of northwestern Nevada there had this legend of this, the Sitka, this ancient giant race that was wreaking havoc on not just the Paiutes, but all the coalition of tribes. So they came together, according to legend, trapped this race of hybrids into this cave and set it ablaze as they tried to escape. And so people thought this was just a cute legend until Chief Winnemucca's daughter wrote a book in the early 1900s called Life Among the Paiutes. And in the book, she talked about the red-haired people eaters and how her most treasured garment was a dress trimmed with this red hair of one of the slain enemies. And so it kind of took on new life, this legend. So fast forward to 1911, there's bat guano miners out. Guano is bat dung. So these desolate caves in Nevada are just filled with, thousands of years of this buildup. And so they use that for fertilizer. And so these miners are in 1911 are mining in this cave, and they start to find countless artifacts. So many that the University of California, Berkeley sent out archaeologists in a year later, in 1912. And I've read through the whole report. It's called Lovelock Cave by Loudon Harrington. And these guys basically lend credence to the entire legend and what the miners said they saw. The miners said they not only found artifacts, but giant skeletons, 7, 8 feet in length. And so in their own book, they depict, pictures of some of these craziest artifacts. the most elaborate duck decoys on Earth that are now, I believe, on display at the Smithsonian, because this was once a prehistoric lake. It's now a desert. It used to be this lush oasis. And, but what else did these archaeologists find? They found like stone-notched calendars. A pestle was found like this big outside the mouth of the cave. And one of the lead, I think, anthropologists from the University of Reno said that this seems to corroborate the legend of Lovelock Cave. But what's more, to end this, so the archaeologists they say, skeletons that were very large. They said the biggest ones were taken by the miners and used for like fraternal purposes, initiations. But they said they found a humanoid that looks very similar to what you see in Paracas, Peru, in the cave as well. And so, but the archaeologists go on record as saying what we found in here lends credence to the Paiutes legends of a giant tribe. And to end it, up till the early 2000s, there was people that visited the Winnemucca Museum who said that they saw some of these large skulls in a back room. And there's a photograph I've got on my website, megalithic.marvels.com. If you type in Lovelock Cave, you'll see all these photos pop up. But you see like 4 skulls on a backroom shelf, and the one in the middle is dwarfing the others. And the people who took this and who have seen this said these were skulls from Lovelock Cave. Well, the museum curator, I think her name is Barbara Powell, I got her direct quote. She says, yeah, we have to hide these in the back closet because the state doesn't recognize the legitimacy of these skulls. And that was the museum director saying that. I've got the quote, and so it's not Arizona, but it's neighboring Nevada, right? We've got so many countless examples that Dan could tell us about and others of a cover-up. I can look you in the eyes and tell you from the research I've done, it's 100% there is a cover-up, and so that leads to a why, but I know Dan's got something to say.
First of all, I wanted to address something that Luke had talked about, how the Native Americans have this belief whether you're not allowed to take pictures of the skulls or their remains or draw or write down the measurements or acknowledge that they ever existed. This is, I'm going to call bullshit on this because look at the Amish culture. The Amish, Mennonites, and all these people, they're very insular, they're very tight-knit, and some of them don't want you to take their picture. Some of them don't give a rap. So I'm going to have a hard time believing that this tiny insular community can't agree on something like this, but that whole idea of the natives don't want you to take pictures of their skulls, that goes to Papua New Guinea, that goes to Japan, that goes to all across the Pacific. It's so ubiquitous that, and if you look, you'll find quite often it's not the natives saying that, it's the museums that are, oh, we're just doing this out of deference. Yeah, again, I call bullshit. The second thing that I'm going to call bullshit on is when they say that the giants, their whole, every time you read these reports, they always say the person that did the measurements was stupid. They didn't know that the person's head was crushed. They didn't understand that if you put your tippy toes out, you get taller. And it's like, sometimes these guys are actual like bona fide scientists that are like well respected, and I have a GED and I can measure with a tape measure to a 32nd of an inch and do it real accurately, and I know that when I stand on my tippy toes I grow, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say these scientists did too. I could be wrong, but
Thank you, by the way. You just answered the question I didn't ask yet. When I heard Billy mention the word the golden age, my heart, I just had to pull it back in because it just flew. I know we're on the precipice of it. I think we're like, it's amazing to be here at this time because, I mean, Yeshua calls it the 1,000 years of peace, and Age of Aquarius, Native Americans might call it the 7th or I think 8th fire, I forget. Anyway, I think it's near. And the problem I have is between now and when that happens, it's a big giant step that can kill us. And so you know, between AI that can enslave and kill us, not to be such an optimist, but, you know, and financial tokenization and 1984, blah, blah, blah. Between now and then, we have to navigate around this, and I do have a property or two that's off-grid and no address and just coordinates and stuff, and I'm looking to start a small community of people who maybe don't need all that stuff. Not that I'm saying it's bad or anything, but so in case anyone's from government. So I was just thinking if besides the fact that I'm making sure there's clean water and things like that, and I was also thinking, is there a way to not use money so that we don't have to worry about the tokenization stuff, which the Mennonites and the Amish gave me an answer just real quick to maybe go take a look at them and maybe have a chat with them, so thank you. But in a past life regression I did many years ago, I actually saw myself leave leave Atlantis, you know, with the water behind me, and I survived. Okay, so I'm like, here we are again. So question is, mentally, physically, spiritually, land-wise, do you have any advice for me or any of us who might be kind of creating wellness and holistic communities to get through these times for ourselves, but also to help others so that we can get to that golden age that Billy was talking about, you know, unscathed and maybe, you know, thriving instead of just surviving? So that's my basic question.
I got a quickly counterintuitive answer on one level is, you know, humans have this innately violent nature, and we want to compete. Even, you know, it's a lot more fun to watch people argue than it is to watch people just be like, yes, I agree with you. Well, yes, I agree with you. And this is just innately wired into us. And at this point in human history, I think that honestly, technology has offered us a pretty healthy outlet. If you look at the rise of video games, you'll watch the decline of violence go right alongside it. So I'm not saying let your kid play Fortnite 16 hours a day, but a couple hours a day is probably a healthy thing in all honesty. And as we have, like, it's difficult when you think about it, but we really are in a spot where we're trying to grapple with these like lofty ideas when we still, like I was saying earlier, have just these animalistic forms. And so don't feel guilty if you take a little pleasure that doesn't hurt somebody but that is a waste of time. You're only here once. I watched polar bears play with each other on this thing. Two polar bears have never met each other before on this documentary. They ran around together for like 4 hours and they run off and they never do anything again, and they were sliding on the ice and burning calories like it didn't matter because they're alive. So yeah, to hell with it. Maybe I'll die from this later, but today I'm gonna have a good time. So enjoy yourself a little bit. Don't be too stressed about it because you're not gonna be healthy if you are.
And yeah, I agree with Dan on that. Sometimes you gotta, you know, sometimes we become fanatics, and so we have to have balance. There has to be balance in everything, right? And so too much of anything in any direction is, you know, you hit the polarity too hard, all of a sudden you're tipping the boat in either direction. And so one thing I did though was I'm a prepper, and I prepped years and years ago. And in 2010, I started a project called Fort Terra Nova, and it completed in 2013. It was featured on the History Channel. It's an underground city the size of 3 Walmarts. It can save the lives of 360 people for up to 1 year, completely off the grid, about 50 feet below the earth, in a dome structure. I used Radius Engineering, one of the previous engineering companies for the military, to build underground bases. And the reason why I did that, just studying geology, the work of like Randall Carlson, knowing that these cyclical cycles will come around, and if it's not for me, maybe for a future generation, you know, to have these structures available and ready. But one thing in my research, and what I brought this up was, to answer her question, was understanding that commodities have real value in a apocalyptic situation or a collapse of economy. And so I stocked up on a lot of freeze-dried coffee, right? Because coffee is the #1 liquid in terms of drinking commodity in the world, right? The number one is oil, but behind that consumption is actually coffee. And at the end of the world, most people will want a nice hot cup of coffee. Just to feel normal again. When you watch the movie Dune, and they're out there in the wilderness, they make a nice hot cup of coffee. But yeah, commodities are important because trading money's not going to have any value, and seed banking is very important as well. You're going to need seeds. We have the farming done, so we have the pool actually has a tilapia pool. So we have this cycle of obviously you feed the tilapia, they poop, that feeds the food, the plants and everything that grow. And so hydroponics we have there, we have container loads of food. We have a turbine diesel engine mechanic. We have dentists, doctors. Everyone there, everyone who's a part of the shelter system has a particular purpose and a function. So if you're building these communities, what I'm trying to tell you is try to get people involved that can actually provide a function or a service to the actual community, not just a freeloader that's just going to come and hang out until they pass away. It's just, you got to function. It's really important. Another thing you got to understand is that you don't want people to come in there sick and ill. That sounds horrible, but for me, it's really important not to have a disease spreading in a closed environment, right? The geology studies and everything else for the underground shelter system were really expensive. Argon gases and all these things, you gotta research all these things. You have to, is there a clean underwater river? If you're gonna build a community, even if it's above ground, you're gonna wanna know if there's underground clean flowing water, fresh water that you can tap into, make a well, right? Because what if the electricity in the grid's down and you can't pump water, you're gonna need to get well water. And also you wanna know a lot of things about survival. And you need a few vehicles that run on the old points system. Who knows about points? No electronic starters. Because EMPs will take out all the microchips and everything else, you'll never be able to start the vehicle. But with points, you can just replace the points and you can start the vehicle. So we have some front load tractors, we have some old hoopties that run on the old point system in case you need some vehicles to get around. Just things that you maybe not are thinking about. We know we're gonna love the crystals and we're gonna love the meditation and the yoga and everything else, but when it comes down to survival, you really gotta begin to consider a lot of different things. And so, that's why I built that shelter, and it's underneath 100 acres. So you can actually farm the land when you come up out of there. You can actually turn that land into a farm, as well as communities. So you got to think about. You have to be a futuristic thinker as to where things might go. Always think the worst, even though it's not. If you're going to build a community where you're going to retreat to, you want to be 700 feet above sea level in a gradual incline. You don't want to be on a fault line, because earthquakes are no good. You don't want to be downwind from the Gulf Stream of any volcanic activity or even dormant volcanoes. And you want to be out of the ash flow of the Yellowstone caldera, because when that thing pops, it'll cover the whole damn United States, except for the East Coast. So you want to look into areas that are also not anywhere close to any nuclear reactors, nuclear power plants, because if those things crack and break, well, your hair's going to fall out and your eyes are going to bleed. So you got to do a lot of research to pick your location. But I don't believe it's end of the world thinking. I just think it's futuristic thinking. We know that the Earth has cycles, and I'm not saying that any of these bad things are going to happen tomorrow. This was just a legacy thing for me. And when you look and do the research, and you study these ancient civilizations, we realize that they rise and they fall. A lot of the rising and falling is due to geological catastrophes, like Atlantis. And so this is just something that, an ace in the hole that may or may not even work. But it can be applied to any type of a situation where you're building a little community, whether it's above ground or below ground. Just consider some things about the area and some of the resources that you'll need to be able to tap into.
Do you guys see the kind of disparity of opinions you get for your money here? You get build your own complex, protect yourself, do everything you can, or play Fortnite. Choose your own adventure.
Thank you. What brought me here was when you mentioned the mounds, and I have personally been in the Cahokia Mounds in Illinois. So I work with non-physical beings that they tell me where to go. And in these mounds, I learned the important lesson of what information is, that matter holds information. So when I was in these mounds, I saw how many women were, they discovered a bunch of bodies of women that were killed. And in my process of helping this trauma being resolved, the intention of the colonization to eradicate the tribe. So my question is, because the information is the matter holds information, I'm being guided right now to South Africa, and I would love to know from you and maybe an inspiration where I feel this deep calling to bridge Sedona and the Americas with Africa. And I just don't have experience and knowledge that you do. So I would love to know what sides maybe of my best interest to support the bridging between the sacred side of Sedona, because when I went to Cahokia Mound, I saw energetic connections to Egypt and tunnels underneath. But I don't know what could Africa hold that is connected to this area, to Americas, and in South Africa specifically, since I'm going 3 weeks. Is there anything in that area that you may feel inspired to share for me? Thank you.
Well, in South Africa, you have the Adams calendar. I was going to go visit it, right, but then the COVID came. I was on my world tour for some things and never got a chance to get there, but I'm definitely looking forward to getting there maybe in 2027. And Adams calendar is according to archaeologists, one of the oldest gold mines known to mankind, date back to about 200,000 years. And the thing that's strange is they're in concentric circles. So in some way, I don't know if that had to do with maybe the technology or harnessing the energy by utilizing those circles to do this, to create this site. But it's an amazing place, and it aligns with some text in the Epic of Atrahasis, some ancient Sumerian text where they talk about this site, and they talk about the fact that the Ajiji, which were the working class people at the time that were supposedly had this advanced knowledge on construction, decided they wanted to go to war, and they met at the hill near this site, and they almost went to war against Anu and Lil and Enki in this text, according to the text. And the war didn't happen, the coup didn't happen, but it's crazy that the time frame from some researchers bring that date back to around 200,000 years or so, and this site is about 200,000 years old. This could be the site of some of the very first human beings, Homo sapiens sapien, doing work in gold mines or mining gold or in some way utilizing and harnessing that gold maybe for some purpose, technological, and then building these concentric circles, which to me, anytime I see circles, I always think of energy. So maybe that could be a link, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that feels resonant. I do work with green energy technology, so that really feels resonant. Thank you so much.
I'd like to hearken back to the first person that came up talking about the Boogosphere, or spheres. There's also the Bet sphere, which there's a good Y-Files episode about that, but it's another mysterious sphere. The Betts family found it, and it would follow them around the living room and go uphill and things like that. That's not what I wanted to talk about. But so I've been going down the Atlantis rabbit hole recently, and of course that starts with a good reading of the Timaeus and Critias and what Plato was really trying to get at, or trying to puzzle what he might have been trying to get at. And so the concentric circle thing pops up again and again, and he talks about, one of the things that struck out to me this time that I reread it, I'll just preface it with this, is he talks about the priest that he said Solon got the information from, at Sais, and he said that the priest sort of, well, he humbled the Atlanteans and said, or the Greeks, and he said, you guys don't know anything, you're like children, you forget every time there's the cataclysm, and there's been a bunch more than just the flood you're talking about. But he also kind of gives the reader an out too, that you don't have to obsess about Atlantis. He says, Egypt has got a preservation because of our unique geographical location that goes back as far as anywhere on the planet. So like you don't really need to go anywhere else other than Egypt, and by extension you probably also meant South America, wherever, where we're finding all this cool stuff that we talked about here. But I thought that was interesting. You don't need to obsess about Atlantis, but that didn't stop me. I'm still obsessing about it. But the concentric circle. So he talks about an outer ring where the wall was coated in, I think, tin. Correct me if I'm wrong. I talked to some of the people here already about this. Forgive me for repeating it, but the audience can now hear my rambling. Then the next wall in was copper, then orichalcum, and then gold, I believe, and then the temple was silver with gold pinnacles. And it's part of my meandering and trying to figure out, well, where was this place? Of course, you look at like the reshot structure and all that, and then you realize, well, how the hell could it have gotten 1,400 feet above sea level? And there's always problems with everything. Nothing's perfect, nothing fits. But where were there circular cities? And it seems like they focused, or the actual circular cities that we had at ancient times were in Mesopotamia. So like Mari was an ancient one, I think the most ancient one. There's the Rujum al-Hiri, which is a megalithic site in the Golan Heights. Baghdad, excuse me, Baghdad was a round city. There's Dur in Persia. And it seems like it's sort of pointing towards the Persian Gulf. And you start thinking, or at least I started thinking, maybe that was Eden, and that was the Persian Gulf was exposed land 12,000 years ago. And then I started thinking about Dwarka being the sunken city off the west coast of India, and close to Mohenjo-Daro and the Indus Valley civilization. But it's interesting that, in contrast to Atlantis, they're both sites that sink under the sea, and they're created by a sea god. And Dwarka is described as being square. So it's a squared like a chessboard, whereas Atlantis is circular. And I started to think, is this talking about a mandala? And if you kind of convolve the two, you get kind of a Tibetan mandala. And is it focusing us towards a spiritual evolution? Is it trying to get us to progress towards an enlightenment, focus on that? And I think it's also trying to get us to find it and find mathematical truths and all of the above. But just curious about your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Well, I think the question would be, what do we think about the connection between Dwarka and Atlantis, the concentric circles and the square, making a mandala, so that we can create this spiritual connection from heaven to earth. And I think, one of the things I believe is the main mission for mankind on earth is to understand that we're already living in heaven. I know that may be hard for some people to wrap their minds around, but I believe that this is a proving ground. And just one giant experiment of maybe Googles of experiments going on in the entire known universe, maybe even throughout the multiverse, how many civilizations will recognize the secrets left behind, that this is a realm that is tied to the spiritual, and that it's not that you should die so you can live, is that you can learn how to live now. And how many of us will eventually bring heaven to earth? In other words, will we be able to alchemically convert the darkness into light right here in this limited time that we have? And maybe that's the ultimate mission on this planet.
I just did a deep dive recently on Plato, And how many people here have read Plato's writings? Yeah. So, one of the things that's interesting is when you read Plato, when you study the classical Athenians, you study the archaic, or I should say classical Greeks in general. You study the archaic Greeks. That sort of dark age between the fall of the Bronze Age and then the rise of classical Greece. You learn that the Greeks lost a lot of their cultural memory. The reason that Greek mythology is so dense and it permeates the whole Greek world, and there's so much of it, is because the Greeks were trying to find a way to explain this lost ancient world, right? So many of the classical Greeks are sitting in the ruins or sitting in the shadow of the ruined palaces that sit up on all the hilltops of these major civilizations like the Mycenaeans and the Minoans. Has anybody ever heard of them here? If you watch the movie Troy, Agamemnon is the king of the Mycenaeans, and the Minoans risen and fell before there. And, the Greeks are well aware of this idea of great civilizations rising and falling, due to just catastrophic events, whether that's natural, whether it's an invasion of foreign people, whether it's trade routes falling apart, which happens in both of those, they're very, very familiar with this. And like I said, they live in the shadow of the ruins of civilizations that were greater and wealthier than they are. One of the things that they would be very familiar with was the civilization of the Minoans that lived on Crete, the southern island in the Aegean. This was a civilization that is what we would call a consumer society. We don't know the identity of a single Minoan person, which tells us that they didn't have kings, they didn't have royalty, they didn't have dynasties. It was a consumer society based on the product of the copper that they were able to export out of the Aegean up into the Greek mainland and then down across the Mediterranean. And so, I guess a civilization that we could sort of compare ourselves to would be the Minoans. We're very much based on money and consuming, right? So imagine the way that Mycenaeans or mainland Greeks would have looked at these people as being greedy. Their whole civilization is based on money. And then at some time around 1550 BC, the island of Thera, which today is known as Santorini, and the city of Akrotiri that was on it, which was the single wealthiest, most powerful city in the Minoan world. All the Minoans evacuate because these earthquakes are just continuously wrecking these cities. They leave, and the fourth biggest volcanic eruption in world history erupts from the island of Santorini, covers the Aegean in this black cloud for 3 days. Following that, all of these palaces and towns along the island of Crete where the Minoans exist, somehow they burn down, which is probably in the chaos of the darkness in the sky. They light their own cities on fire by accident because of all the candles. That civilization, the most powerful, wealthy civilization that the Mediterranean had seen, this is something most people don't realize. The Minoans were so powerful that at no point in their history would they ever even consider the possibility of trading places with an Egyptian. They would have looked at ancient Egypt as being a dump compared to the world that they had. That's a fact. And so you have the most powerful civilization in the Mediterranean that collapses from the most dramatic natural event that any of these people are aware of in their history. The Mycenaeans move in and invade, and of course the Bronze Age continues. You get the Trojan War a couple centuries, 2 or 3 centuries following that. And then the Bronze Age world collapses. And so the Greeks look back on their world as, they're very familiar with this idea of cataclysmic events wiping out their civilizations. Within just a decade, maybe like 13 years before Plato even begins talking to us about Atlantis, the Greek city of Helike is sunk. So that's kind of in his consciousness, right? And the other thing I should say is I really like the point that our friend made that came up here, that the Egyptians kind of laugh at the Greeks and say, like, one of the things that they would always say is there are no old Greeks. The Greeks don't remember their ancient history. They're all just children. They don't know anything. Because the Egyptians have this long lineage that is continuous from 3100 BC, I like the lowest date, all the way to the time that Egypt is annexed by the Roman Empire in 30 BC, when Cleopatra dies. The Egyptians just have this long, continuous history, and they're aware of their past. And I think that it's an interesting point that he made, that we don't have to focus specifically on Atlantis because the Egyptians had known about so many other cataclysms as well. And the other thing I want to add to that is that, we take, because Plato is so important to our modern culture today, we almost treat him like a biblical figure. We hang on every single word that he says, every precise description that he's giving of Atlantis. But I think we can give ourselves a little bit of leeway here, because classical Greeks, when reaching back into their past, they're not always super precise. Like even Solon himself, living in the late 600s BC, early 500s BC, the Greeks had a somewhat good understanding of who this man was. He was a lawmaker, but he was also a legendary figure as well. So he's sort of a mythological figure as much as he is an important cultural figure to the Athenians. And so I don't think it's that we have to hang on every single word that Plato is saying, but the story he's telling about Atlantis, he's telling us about a civilization that used to be great but fell because of its greed. And almost every single civilization before then and since then had fallen to, from that exact thing. And so that's, I guess, hearkening back to why this studying of the ancient world is so important, is that I think it expands our understanding of who we are as a people. It's kind of a guide to the way that we can live, and this idea that that none of our existence are infinite, and that being selfless and I think continuing to have a wider perspective of our life going forward is probably the most important thing. And I think that is the point, that even if Atlantis really did exist, or it's drawn on from 2 or 3 different sources, I think that the point of that, and what Plato would say, is that this was a cautionary tale about the route that he did not want the Athenians to follow. And that's the point of the story. That's why he felt the need to bring it up. So.
To add to what Luke was saying there, when it comes to Plato's story, he's very clear about 2 things. One is that it's not bullshit. He's telling you the truth. And the second thing is that he's selling you a narrative too. But he's trying to say that a modern day version would be somebody saying the West is falling, the West is falling. But he invoked something that his contemporaries at least believed was true. Nobody's going to tell you, if somebody says the West is falling, they invoke Rome. They don't tell you about how Harry Potter fell apart and how the Legend of Zelda failed. They tell you about Rome because they touched something that's real. So at the very least, in my mind, it's proof that Plato and his contemporaries believed in, like Luke was saying, in these catastrophic things, the loss of the civilization. The other thing I would point out is that Plato was using it as an allegorical tool as well. So you're going to get, I think that's why we have orichalcum in there. Orichalcum was a Greek metal, so of course the temple. They were also very democratic, and they were also a bunch of warrior poets, all things that the Greeks valued. But you get the biblical version of the flood, and now it's all of a sudden about monotheism, and it's about following the one true God. It's funny, it's almost like this same story exists, but it gets different cultural lens attached to it. And if you really look at the idea of the ancient world being connected in numerous different ways, right? It's not just Atlantis touching these different places. In my mind, anyways, the whole damn world smaller than academics are saying that it was in ancient times. With that in mind, we're going to have a lot of places that are going to quite possibly be conflated together. You can imagine 10,000 years from now, they wouldn't be calling us North Korea and France and America. They would lump us all in together as the electronics people. So I think we see a lot of that.
No, I think that was great. Thank you.
Oh, I could, but I will refrain. Yeah, I've got a few things to say about Atlantis, but
no way.
Not right now.
Okay.
But maybe tomorrow. Okay. We'll see if there's interest. Yeah.
Well, a couple of things I was going to bring up when the lady mentioned, or someone mentioned earlier, what kind of things we see here in the Southwest. That was a gentleman. Referring to the Kincaid expedition, and David Childress always brings that up, the discovery of ancient Asian artifacts, Buddhist statues Egyptian statues in the Grand Canyon in sort of a Cappadocia, Dare and Carry You underground living setting where thousands of people could live. That was right here. And David Childress's story is that the Hohokam came from Southeast Asia, and it's a Shivite cult, and they ended up in Phoenix as the Hohokam. I said that I didn't have that right. Southeast Asia was the Cam. And then he says these people came here to Arizona and later became the Hohokam. And then when he starts talking about they're related to the Cambodians in Easter Island, and they have these skills of, moat building. And when you take the material taken out of the moat around Angkor Wat, it's something like, how big?
There's more mass in the Great Pyramid. When you take out the soil needed to build a moat around Angkor Wat in Cambodia, I did the calculations, about 13 feet deep and the miles around. It comes out to about maybe 18% more mass than it was to build the Great Pyramid itself.
So my point is that now I could see the dots connected where they came through the Sea of Cortez, up the Salt River, and they're here in Phoenix building canals that we still use today. They would have the ability to do something like this in the Grand Canyon. And according to David, they slowly kept moving up north, up to here, and I think he thinks they eventually became the Pueblo people who built like Chaco Canyon. Well, Chaco Canyon might be from the Aztecs as well, from the south. But Mesa Verde, Hopi, Zuni, all of the Pueblo people possibly came from Southeast Asia. And on top of that, there's very similar words in Hopi to Japanese and Tibetan. The word for peach in Zuni is moai, and the word for peach in Japanese is momo. It's very, very similar. We also see the swastika was very popular in Native American and all over the world. So how did that happen? There's a lot of other similarities that are happening right here in the Southwest that connected to different parts of the world. For example, there's a book called The Pale Ink, where there was a Chinese traveler traveling all over the Southwest and documented Arizona. And then out in Zuni, you find Chinese petroglyphs. And supposedly they took off just before the Chinese showed up. So you have the peach that comes from Asia and goes all the way to Georgia. And it's just fascinating how these connections connect us all. And that's one of the main reasons and purposes that I bring these fabulous speakers and researchers together, is so that we can have a chance to listen to what they have to say, learn from them, and then collectively connect the dots to show that we're really all connected. So again, I want to thank all the speakers here for showing up this weekend. If we can give them a round of applause. And also, I'd like to give a shout out to all the volunteers, all the people that put in time to put this whole event together. You can't imagine how many pieces there are. And a lot of people in this room pick up different parts of those pieces and make it look easy. So thank you to all the people that are volunteering and serving us this weekend. Thank you. Okay, and then I think that's it for tonight. We won't keep you any longer. I think we've kept you almost 3 hours. It's like a Joe Rogan show. And we're going to be hanging around. We got till 11 o'clock at night. The DJ is going to take over from here. So this is a social hour to gather with the speakers and each other and to connect even more. Tomorrow morning, we'll be meeting back here at 10 in the morning. And then we'll be going from there. So I hope you all enjoyed your evening, and we look forward to